And in this video, I always make little notes to try to formulate my thoughts on videos that I want to send out. And they're usually something to do with a hot topic or something going on, or a patient asked me a question, or I spoke to a medical doc, whatever it may be. So, a few things. Recently, I've had a few questions asked by people either during consults or even other patients. And here's the gist of the story. So the story is something like this. Well, Dr. Farley, your neurobiomedicine program, I see that you get a lot of results. You have a lot of patients that have given you testimonials on your website. But I'm just curious. I mean, my medical doc says there's nothing that can be done about this. And also, my medical doc said if it was working, everyone would be doing it. So, my answers to that are this. Your medical doc has one tool. Hang on, where's my tool? Has one tool. It's a drug. This is a chemically or genetically modified substance in nature that goes through, that must get the FDA clearance to be used on humans. And 1/3 of all of these drugs will be pulled off the market once they're approved because they end up killing people and they're very dangerous and they have massive side effects. So this is the tool, the only tool that the medical doc has. I don't hear anyone getting any other advice about anything because they don't. So based on that model, okay, and what's that model? So that model is based on pathology. Here's a book. I hated this book, but I had to study it. So this is Robbins' Pathological Basis of Disease. So this is all the different diseases. And when you look them up in here and you go, oh, what's this disease? And it tells you what's happening with the disease. And then what's this disease? And it tells you what's happening with the disease. The problem with this is that the research is that 85% of these diseases are termed idiopathic. What does that mean? It means we have no idea, doc. We have no idea, Mrs. Jones, why you have this. Or then the other wastebasket term that I hear all the time is it's genetic. So how do we prove that? We don't. And the genetic idea was totally disproven by the Human Genome Project that ran from 1990 through 2002. And when they were all said and done, the top scientists in the world published in Nature and Science basically said about 5% of all disease is truly genetic. So why do we keep saying this? We keep saying this so that we can push this model. We're going to push this model down your throat so that you are thought to believe there's nothing that can be done. And if someone comes along that says, hey, I don't follow this model, and I don't follow this model for myself nor my patients. And the goal should be to restore function. Well, then people get into this idea, well, is there any research? Let's just pick a topic, Parkinson's. Oh, do you have any research on Parkinson's and what you're talking about? No, because we're not treating disease. You're already wrong when you're treating disease. When you go to the integrative alternative doctor instead of the allopathic doctor for your Parkinson's or for your thyroid or for your depression, you're still wrong because they're treating the disease. I don't treat disease. We treat lack of ease, improper function. And how do we determine that? We must measure. We do in-house Super 7 Plus testing. It's going to be advanced even next year to include more tests that I'm looking at right now so I can measure as much of anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry as possible. Then we also do, if the case qualifies, we do very, very detailed blood work and specialty blood work. And then from there, we set up a plan. I go to my toolbox and say, what would I do? Well, what would I do depends upon what it is that I found. Because if we're not treating disease, and people ask me this all the time, so what's your protocol? What are you going to do? What do you do for a Parkinson's patient? I'm not treating disease. I'm treating the patient. And if I have 3 Parkinson's patients, and I'm thinking of 3 people right now. One guy is overweight, is a massive diabetic, has had spine surgery and neck surgery, and been on meds for a long time. This guy has had 6 concussions and never really took any meds, but drank a fair amount of alcohol early on. This person over here is not a diabetic, is very thin, was around toxic chemicals her entire life, and had chronic sinus infection, so she took a lot of antibiotics. So I'm going to treat them the same? No. I'm going to, through my process, measure, identify the gears, and set up the best plan of action for each individual person. Now, might there be some crossover in these people? Yeah, there might be. But again, we're not treating disease. So, the book that I hated, which was the pathology book. The books that I loved, here they are. Anatomy. I read this book front to back 4 or 5 times. I remember going to my anatomy class and I said to the teacher, I will not be in class because I need to know the whole thing. So I'm just going to read everything. So while you're sitting there giving them this synopsis of the head and neck, I'm just going to go read the entire head and neck. And I did, and I banged out the class. The next class that I loved was physiology. I read this book and another book numerous times, and I still go back at times to just refresh my brain on normal physiology, how things work. This is the key, how things work. Not managing symptoms with a toxic drug. And here's the thing. I'm personally not using drugs. Oh, one more thing too. So, are these required for health? Absolutely not. No way. Now, are a lot of people taking these? Yes. Does that mean that it's required for health? No. So what are a lot of people doing? They're barely managing symptoms with drugs that add more chemical stress into a stressed out system, and 1/3 of these will be pulled off the market. They have massive side effects and massive downside. And now why do they have such massive side effects and massive downside? Because these are either chemically or genetically modified products in nature. So we steal something from nature, an herb, and then we modify it. And why do we modify it? So that we can patent it and we can call it a drug. That's the process. And then we put this onto the market, and then after a while, about 1/3 of these gets pulled off the market. It's not healthcare. It is disease crisis intervention. Let's not confuse that. It is disease crisis intervention. Doing your mammogram is not healthcare. It is disease crisis intervention. It might pick up an early lump. It does not look at function. When you go and get your colonoscopy, it might pick up a polyp. I hear this all the time. It might pick up a polyp. It does not address function. These are just nothing more than early diagnosis of disease, okay? If it does that. Plus, there's side effects. You got to drink this big glass of chemicals and plastics and everything else, and you got to get radiation of your breast every year. So that's for you to decide what you're going to follow and what you're not going to follow. But again, it's not healthcare. It is disease crisis intervention. So the next book, biochemistry. Now, I will tell you, this book is pretty complex, but I still love the book, and I push my kids at this point in time to study biology and biochemistry, because biochemistry is the science of the chemical biological processes that happen inside of us. So how do our foods turn into energy? How do our foods create new cells? How do our vitamins and minerals work? How do the enzymes work? Oh, one more thing too. In the biochemistry book, guess what you won't find? You won't find any drugs. Now, why won't you find it? Because it's not part of normal biochemistry, anatomy, or physiology. So you need to recognize that when you're following that form of healthcare, you might need it to get yourself out of a crisis. Maybe. My goal is to not put myself in a crisis, to take care of the system, to tend to it, to utilize things that restore function, that improve function. And I must go to a doctor that understands this if I ever have a chance at having this happen inside of me. And healing is the ability of our cells to turn over a better quality cell, a more optimal cell over time. You do not have the exact same brain and body that you did 2 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago. You are not a car that you can take that's all beat up and you put it in the garage and you pull it back out 6 months later or a year later and you start working on it. because within a very short time frame, days to a week, you have worse cell production, worse cell turnover. You're getting worse and worse and worse. And by the time you get symptoms, you have 85% damage to your cells. So, what I would also say is this too. There's the God complex, and then there's the recognizing the God within. So when I explain to you, and I have it all over my website, that the power that made the brain and body can heal the brain and body, I simply mean that we must identify the stressors specific for each individual person, creating an abnormal allostatic stress load. If we can reduce those or influence those mechanisms, we have the ability for the cells to turn over at a better quality, higher quality, and that is healing. Okay, that is healing. What's the God complex? The God complex are the medical docs or the docs out there that tell you that someone's going to be dead in 2 months, that there's nothing you can do about this problem, and that you should just listen to them and watch you or your loved ones circle down the drain and go down the drain. We are never going to get there with the drug because the drug does not restore function. It cannot, will not. The idea that we are going to cure disease with drugs is ridiculous. Not going to happen. This is the propaganda and the myth that's pushed all day long. We're waiting for the big breakthrough. We haven't had any breakthroughs yet. We have the worst response to COVID because everyone follows this model. We have 80% of the U.S. population is obese. The third leading cause of death in the United States is the medical system. 1/3 of all drugs will be pulled off the market. Our seniors drop like flies from a virus that comes in, that if we changed some things in their stress system and looked at their possible food and nutrients, we may have influenced this greatly, but we don't. We have kids through the roof with autism. We have cancer through the roof. We have heart disease through the roof. We have autoimmune through the roof. And yet we keep following this system. You know why? Because the system directly markets to us. So that's the story. That's my rant for today. So health is restoring function. I'm an expert in function. I use anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry. We measure in the office testing, determine whether you qualify for a full program or not. In that full program, we'll usually include blood work and specialty blood work and possibly other tests that I think are most important to understand your specific functional disturbances and how we can lower your allostatic stress load and let those cells start to work better, turn over better, and ultimately create a higher level of healability. So thank you. Hopefully you found this interesting. Any questions, as always, please let me know. Have a great day.